Hello, my beloved demon darlings. I would be happy if you could leave a comment where in the world you are listening from. Thanks. Let's get scared. The Red Lion Inn, room 301. It was a cold, crisp fall evening when I arrived at the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. The picturesque New England town, with its old brick buildings and trees ablaze in fiery oranges and reds, felt straight out of a postcard. I had heard stories about the inn's haunted reputation, but to be honest, I didn't give much weight to such things. I was in town for a quick weekend getaway, hoping for nothing more than some peace and quiet. The Red Lion Inn, built in 1773, had an air of timeless charm. Walking through its front door felt like stepping back in time. The inn's creaky wooden floors, Victorian furnishings, and vintage decor created a warm, nostalgic atmosphere. Yet something about it felt odd. I brushed off the unease that settled over me, convincing myself that it was nothing more than the long drive or the chilly autumn air. At the front desk, the clerk handed me the key to room 301. "Oh, you've got 301, she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That room has quite a bit of history. Some guests say it's eventful." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her cryptic comment. "Eventful how?" I asked, though I could already guess where the conversation was going. "Oh, nothing too bad. Just stories, you know? Some say they felt things. But I'm sure you'll have a peaceful stay." Her vague warning hung in the air as I made my way up the narrow, winding staircase to the third floor. I wasn't one to buy into ghost stories, but the way she spoke made me feel uneasy. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, the soft, irregular creaks of the floorboards beneath my feet made the silence all the more oppressive. Room 301 was at the end of the hall. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the warm glow of a single antique lamp on a small wooden table near the bed. The room itself was charming, in an old-world kind of way. The furniture was all dark wood, and the bed had a tall, ornately carved headboard. A rocking chair sat by the window, looking out onto the quiet, moonlit street below. The radiator hummed quietly, filling the room with warmth that contrasted with the sharp chill of the night outside. Despite its charm, there was something unsettling about the room. It was an intangible feeling, as though the very air held a kind of heaviness. Still, I was tired from the long drive, and all I wanted was to relax. After unpacking, I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through a guidebook on local attractions, trying to distract myself from the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. It wasn't long before I decided to turn in for the night. I crawled under the heavy comforter, sinking into the old mattress. The room was silent, save for the occasional groan of the old building settling. I drifted off quickly, the weight of the day pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly. The room was deathly still, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the nightstand. As I lay there, groggy and disoriented, I realized something wasn't right. My feet were cold, ice cold. In my half-asleep state, I assumed I must have kicked the blankets off. But when I reached down to pull the comforter back over me, I froze. The comforter wasn't off me. It was still tucked tightly around my shoulders, but something or someone was pulling at my toes. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. But as my heart pounded in my chest, I felt it again. A slow, deliberate tug on my foot, as though someone or something was trying to pull me out of the bed. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively yanked my legs back under the covers, pulling them up to my chest. I lay there, paralyzed by fear, listening for any sound, any sign that someone else was in the room. But there was only silence. My eyes darted around the darkened room, my mind racing. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, but the sensation of those cold fingers gripping my toes had been far too real. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was impossible to tell. Eventually, my heart rate slowed, and I convinced myself it must have been a muscle twitch, or perhaps the blanket had simply shifted in my sleep. With great effort, I forced myself to relax, sinking back into the mattress and pulling the comforter tightly around me. But the room wasn't done with me yet. Just as I started to drift back to sleep, I felt it again. This time, it wasn't my toes. It was something far worse. I felt the mattress dip beside me, as though someone had just sat down on the bed. My eyes snapped open, my breath hitching in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even turn my head to look. Every muscle in my body was locked in place, as if some unseen force was holding me down. My mind raced, panic taking over as I realized I was completely paralyzed. And then I felt it. A slow, gentle movement, as if someone was carefully fluffing the comforter around me. It was as though they were tucking me in, making sure I was comfortable. But it wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond. All I could do was lie there, helpless, as whatever was in the room with me continued to smooth the blankets, brushing softly against my arms and legs. After what felt like an eternity, the pressure lifted. The weight on the bed disappeared, and I could move again. I bolted upright, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was exactly as it had been before, empty, quiet, still. But I knew I wasn't alone. I jumped out of bed, flicking on the lamp and frantically looking around the room. There was no one there, but the feeling of being watched was overpowering. The air was thick, almost tangible, and I felt like something was standing just out of sight, waiting. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I sat in the chair by the window, watching the first hints of dawn slowly creep across the horizon. I kept the light on, my eyes darting to the bed every few minutes, expecting to see the blankets move on their own. By the time the sun finally rose, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed my things as quickly as I could, avoiding even looking at the bed. When I went down to the lobby to check out, the same woman from the night before was there. She gave me a knowing look, her eyes betraying a faint smile. "Leaving already?" she asked. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. I didn't need to. She seemed to understand. "Room 301?" she said softly. "It's not for everyone." I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know. I just needed to get out of there. As I drove away from the Red Lion Inn, the weight of the night's events still hung heavy in my mind. I had come to the Berkshires looking for a quiet retreat, but what I found was something far more sinister. Room 301 may look like just another charming, old-fashioned hotel room, but it's far from it. Something lingers there, something unseen and unsettling. And if you're ever brave or foolish enough to stay there, be prepared. You won't be sleeping alone. Haunted workplace. I never believed in ghosts. Not really anyway. I mean, sure, I loved a good scary story, but I figured that was all they were. Just stories. That changed when I took a housekeeping job at a historic inn, a place that felt steeped in its own past, its walls practically whispering with memories. The inn was tucked away in a quiet, small town. One of those postcard places that seemed frozen in time. It had been around since the late 1800s, with its original floors, doors, and ornate furniture. I remember being in awe of the intricate woodwork and the old chandeliers when I first walked in. It was beautiful, yes, but it had a certain weight to it, like the past was pressing down on you as soon as you stepped inside. The job itself seemed straightforward. Clean the rooms, tidy up the common areas, vacuum the hallways. Simple enough, right? But things started feeling off pretty quickly. It began with the mirrors. Every time I wiped down a mirror, I'd catch something darting out of the corner of my eye. Just a blur of movement, like someone had slipped out of view right as I turned my head. I tried to brush it off at first. My mind playing tricks on me, I thought. But it kept happening, every single time I stood in front of a mirror. And it wasn't just fleeting shapes either. Sometimes it felt like something or someone was standing just behind me watching. I'd spin around, but of course, there was never anyone there. Then there were the beds. After years of making hospital corners so tight you could bounce a quarter off them, I knew how to tuck in sheets. But at this place, no matter how perfectly I made the beds, I'd turn around to grab a pillow, and suddenly the sheets were untucked. Every single time. It was maddening. I'd redo the bed, walk away, and then find the covers half pulled off, like someone had been lying there. Only I was alone. I started feeling uneasy about the whole thing, but what really rattled me were the footsteps. The inn had narrow, creaky stairs that led up to the rooms, and more than once, as I was lugging the vacuum or fresh linens up to a guest room, I'd hear footsteps behind me. At first, I assumed it was one of my co-workers or maybe a guest. But when I stopped to look, there was no one. Just the sound of footsteps trailing off, like someone had hurried away. It wasn't long before the vacuum itself began acting up. I'd be cleaning one of the long hallways, and suddenly, the vacuum would just stop. I'd check the plug, and it would be out of the socket, even though the cord wasn't stretched taut or snagged on anything. I'd plug it back in, continue vacuuming, and the same thing would happen again, and again. Sometimes it would happen 3 or 4 times in a row, even when the cord was completely slack, like something or someone was yanking it free just to mess with me. The toilets were another weird thing. I can't tell you how many times I'd walk into a guest bathroom, only to hear the toilet flush on its own. Now, I know older plumbing can be quirky, but this was different. The flush was too deliberate, like someone had just used it and walked out seconds before I entered. At first, I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to be that person. The one who comes in and starts talking about haunted rooms and spooky noises. But after one particularly unsettling day, where I felt a constant chill behind me and every room seemed off in some way, I finally went to the manager. I tried to keep my voice casual, though I'm sure he could hear the edge of nerves creeping in. "Hey, have you ever noticed anything strange around here? Like footsteps or mirrors acting weird?" I asked. He didn't even look up from his desk. Just gave a little chuckle and said, "Oh, don't mind that. It's happened since I can remember." My stomach did a little flip. "What's happened?" "All of it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The footsteps, things moving around on their own, appliances acting up. Guests talk about it all the time. Some rooms more than others. But it's just part of the place." His nonchalance floored me. "So, what? You're saying it's haunted?" He shrugged. "Call it what you want. The place has history. Some of it stays with us. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Some of it stays with us. What did that even mean? I started doing some digging into the inn's past, reading old newspaper clippings and combing through local history blogs. The place had been through a lot. It was used as a makeshift hospital at one point, and there were stories of guests disappearing or dying unexpectedly in the early 1900s. Some even claimed that a fire had killed several people, though I couldn't find anything to confirm it. Still, the stories were enough to make me uneasy. The next few days were a blur of strange occurrences. My vacuum would still unplug itself, mirrors would still show those darting shapes. And the footsteps, those damn footsteps, never let up. One afternoon, as I was cleaning an empty guest room, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, even though the windows were shut. I froze, and the hairs on my arms stood up. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could see my breath in the air, as if winter had suddenly swept in. I backed out of the room as fast as I could, but the worst thing happened on a Sunday. I was finishing up for the day, cleaning the last room on the top floor. I'd left the door open to air it out, and I swear I heard someone say my name. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but clear enough to make me stop in my tracks. "Hello?" I called out, stepping into the hallway. There was no answer. I went back to cleaning, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But then I heard it again, louder this time. "Katie!" My heart dropped into my stomach. No one was supposed to be up here. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and bolted down the stairs, leaving the room half finished. As I rushed out the door, I could have sworn I heard footsteps hurrying down the hallway behind me. I didn't last much longer at the inn. A few weeks later, I handed in my notice. It wasn't just the little things anymore. The unexplainable sounds, the mirrors, the beds. It was the feeling that whatever haunted that place was starting to focus on me. The unease that had once been subtle was now unbearable. The air thick with something unseen and unfriendly. I still think about that job sometimes. About how the manager just shrugged it off like it was nothing. Like the ghosts were just part of the decor. Maybe they were. But whatever lingered in that inn, it didn't want to be ignored. And it didn't like me being there. I haven't stayed in a historic hotel since. And to be honest, I don't think I ever will. The Marshall House, a night I'll never forget. It was a last-minute business trip that brought me to Savannah, Georgia. I'd heard a lot about the city's historic charm and haunted reputation, but I wasn't the type to get spooked by ghost stories. I was just looking for a place to stay for a couple of nights, and the Marshall House popped up on my search. I knew the hotel was famous for its rich history, having been built in 1851 and used as a hospital during the Civil War. What I didn't know was that my stay there would leave me with a story I'd never forget. When I arrived, the first thing that struck me was how well preserved the building was. The original wood floors, old brickwork and tall windows gave it an almost eerie beauty. There was something about those floors, knowing they had survived so many decades, so many footsteps. The lobby had that warm, dim glow you find in old hotels, with vintage furniture and flickering chandeliers. It was cozy but unsettling in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. I checked in late in the evening after a long day of travel. The woman at the front desk was polite, but there was something in her eyes, an odd mixture of excitement and caution, when she handed me the key to my room. Room 304. "You're on one of our more active floors," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I brushed it off. Active was probably just hotel code for a room with a view or close to the elevators. The elevator ride up felt long and slow, each creak and groan of the old machinery making my stomach turn slightly. When I finally reached the 3rd floor, the hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit and quiet. My footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floorboards as I made my way to the room. There was a certain heaviness in the air, the kind that makes you feel like someone's watching you, even when you know you're alone. Room 304 was charming in an old-fashioned way. High ceilings, antique furniture, and an oversized window overlooking the quiet Savannah Street below. The bed looked inviting, but I couldn't shake this strange feeling that had settled in my chest. It was like the room itself was waiting for something. Still, I chalked it up to exhaustion and headed to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my face. That's when I noticed it. The faucet in the bathroom was already running. The water was coming out in a thin, steady stream. I frowned, certain I hadn't turned it on. Maybe housekeeping had left it running. I reached over and turned the knob to shut it off. As I did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The sudden chill sent a shiver down my spine, but I shook it off, dried my face, and went to unpack my bag. I tried to relax, but it wasn't easy. Something was off. Every time I moved, the wooden floors creaked in response, almost as if they were mimicking my footsteps. I caught myself glancing at the door more often than I liked. It wasn't paranoia, I told myself. It was just an old building with a lot of history. Old buildings make noise, right? But then the door handle rattled. I froze. It wasn't a gentle nudge either. The door handle shook as if someone was trying to get in. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I moved towards the door, fully expecting someone on the other side. Maybe a confused guest or a member of the staff. But when I opened it, there was nothing. Just the long, empty hallway, as silent and still as before. I closed the door, locking it this time, and sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, snapping me out of my thoughts. A message from a colleague. I responded, glad to focus on something normal. But just as I was about to put my phone down, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. The bathroom light flickered. It wasn't just a quick one-time flicker. The light blinked on and off, erratically at first, then more slowly, almost rhythmically. I stared at it, my brain trying to find a logical explanation. Bad wiring? Maybe, but I knew better. Something was wrong. The room was cold again, and this time, it wasn't just a chill. It felt like the temperature had dropped to near freezing. Then came the noise. It was faint at first, almost a whisper, coming from beneath the floorboards. A low, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the wood. My heart pounded in my ears, and I strained to hear, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, until there was no denying it. Someone, was moving under the floor. I stood, unsure of what to do. My eyes scanned the room, trying to find the source of the noise. And that's when I remembered the story I had read online earlier that day. The bones. During renovations in the 1990s, workers had found human remains. Amputated limbs from soldiers who had been treated in the makeshift hospital that once operated here. They had buried the limbs beneath the floorboards, left to rot and decay for over a century. The sound grew louder, and I could swear I heard voices now, faint and desperate, pleading. I backed away from the bathroom, where the light was still flickering, and sat back down on the bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room felt crowded, like it was filled with unseen presences watching my every move. The air was so thick with tension, I could barely breathe. Suddenly, the door handle rattled again, violently this time, as though someone was furiously trying to break in. I jumped to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest. I ran to the door and yanked it open, only to be met with the same empty hallway. But something was different. The air in the hallway was colder now, and the lights overhead seemed dimmer. I felt like I was being lured out, like whatever was in the room wanted me to leave. I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my key and stepped out into the hall, shutting the door behind me. The moment I did, the noises stopped. The flickering lights, the rattling door, the dragging beneath the floorboards. Everything went silent. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, my mind racing. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if something really was wrong with that room. I decided to go downstairs to clear my head. As I passed the front desk, the woman looked up at me with a knowing glance. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice neutral, but there was an undercurrent of something else in her tone. I hesitated, unsure if I should say anything. "The room, it feels off," I finally admitted, feeling a little foolish. She nodded slowly, as if she had heard this all before. "Room 304 tends to do that. It was part of the old hospital during the Civil War. Some guests say they hear things, feel things." My stomach turned. "Like what?" She shrugged. "Soldiers mostly. Sometimes they hear footsteps or voices. Lights flicker, doors move. Nothing dangerous though." She gave me a small, reassuring smile. "The spirits here are more restless than anything. Left behind, I suppose." I didn't know what to say. I thanked her and made my way back to the room, unsure of whether I even wanted to spend the night there anymore. But I was too tired to leave, and something about the history of the place, dark as it was, kept me curious. When I returned, the room was quiet. The lights were steady, the air warmer, and the bathroom faucet was off. It felt almost normal, almost. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to relax, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, that faint dragging sound, coming from beneath the floorboards. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn finally broke, I packed my things and checked out early, leaving the Marshall house behind. I'd come looking for history, and I found it, just not the kind I had bargained for. If you ever find yourself in Savannah looking for a place to stay, you might consider the Marshall house. But be warned, some of its guests never leave. The haunting at Jefferson Hotel. I wasn't planning on stopping for the night. I just wanted to get through Texas as quickly as possible and make it to my next destination. But after hours of driving through endless empty roads, I was getting exhausted. When I saw a sign for Jefferson, a small town near the Arkansas and Louisiana borders, I figured it was as good a place as any to grab some sleep. The town itself was unremarkable, a quaint little place with an old-fashioned charm that almost felt frozen in time. The streets were eerily quiet as I drove in, and it felt like no one was around. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the buildings, and the air had that thick, oppressive humidity that sticks to your skin. I pulled into what looked like the only hotel in town, the Jefferson Hotel. It was a beautiful old structure, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a period drama. Its brick exterior gave it a haunted vibe, but I figured it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. I parked my car, grabbed my bag, and headed inside. The lobby was dimly lit, with old wooden furniture that creaked with every step I took. A bell sat on the front desk, and there was no one in sight. I hesitated, glancing around the empty room, before tapping the bell. The sound echoed unnervingly through the building. After what felt like an eternity, an old man shuffled out from a back room. His eyes were watery, and his skin had the pallor of someone who hadn't been outside in years. He didn't say much, just handed me a key and mumbled something about the 3rd floor. As I made my way up the creaky staircase, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the isolation, the quietness of the town that made it feel like I was the only living soul around. I found my room 310, and stepped inside. The room was small but clean, furnished with an antique bed and a vanity with an old mirror that was probably as old as the hotel itself. The heavy curtains blocked out most of the light, casting the room in a dull greyish glow. I tossed my bag on the bed and decided to take a hot shower to shake off the stiffness from the long drive. The pipes groaned as I turned on the water, and soon the small bathroom was filled with steam. As I stepped out of the shower, I froze. There, on the bathroom mirror, written in the condensation, was a name: Judy. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't written it. No one else had been in the room. I stared at the letters, trying to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. I wiped the mirror clean, telling myself it must have been some trick of the steam or an old imprint from a previous guest, even though deep down I knew that wasn't possible. I was starting to feel uneasy, more than uneasy. Something was wrong with this place. I got dressed quickly and left the bathroom, but the unsettling feeling followed me. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. It was as if the temperature had dropped dramatically in the few minutes I'd been in the shower. As I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm myself down, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing down the hallway outside my door. At first, I thought it might be another guest, but as the sound got closer, I realized something was off. The footsteps were too heavy, too loud. They didn't sound like they were coming from a person. The steps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, listening, waiting. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I couldn't bring myself to move. After a few moments, the footsteps resumed. This time, they sounded like they were coming from inside the room. I shot up from the bed, looking around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, but the footsteps continued, circling the room, getting closer and closer, until they stopped directly in front of me. I stood frozen, every nerve in my body on high alert, expecting something, someone, to appear. But there was nothing, just the cold air and the suffocating silence. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was overtired, that the stress of the long drive was making me paranoid. But then the footsteps started again, this time moving toward the door, and I heard the distinct sound of the doorknob turning. The door swung open, and for a moment, I was certain I'd see someone standing there. But the hallway was empty. The air was cold, and I could hear the faint echo of footsteps fading down the corridor, as if whoever, or whatever, had just left my room. I couldn't stay in there any longer. Grabbing my keys and phone, I rushed out of the room and down the stairs, the old wooden steps creaking beneath my feet. I was halfway to the front door when I remembered the old man at the desk. Maybe he could explain what was going on, tell me if anyone else had reported strange things happening in the hotel. But when I got to the lobby, the front desk was empty again. The bell was still there, but there was no sign of the old man. It was as if he had vanished. I debated leaving right then and there, just getting in my car and driving until I was far away from this place. But I needed answers. I walked over to the front desk and tapped the bell again, my hand trembling slightly. A few seconds later, the old man appeared from the back room, just as slow and unbothered as before. His expression didn't change when he saw me, and I got the sense that he already knew why I was there. "There's something in my room," I blurted out, my voice shaking. I heard footsteps, and someone wrote a name on the mirror. The old man just nodded slowly, like he'd heard it all before. He leaned against the counter and pulled out a dusty old book from beneath the desk. He opened it to a page in the middle and turned it around for me to see. At the top of the page was a title, The Book of the Dead. Underneath were dozens of names, handwritten in various styles, along with short descriptions: the vanishing man, Judy, the girl in the hallway. Each entry was a story of someone who had experienced something in the hotel, just like I had. Some of the names were people who had died here, and others were something else. I scanned the page, and my blood ran cold when I saw the entry for Judy. It said she was a sex worker, likely murdered in the hotel decades ago. She was known to write her name in the condensation on mirrors after guests took a hot shower, just like what had happened to me. "Why didn't you tell me this place was haunted?" I demanded, my voice rising. The old man shrugged, as if it wasn't his problem. "You're not the first, won't be the last." I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but I could tell I wasn't going to get anything else out of him. He just watched me with those watery, indifferent eyes, as though my fear and confusion were of no concern to him. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. I grabbed my things from the room, my heart racing the entire time, half expecting something to appear behind me in the mirror, or for the footsteps to start up again. But nothing happened. The room was quiet, unnervingly so. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding away from the hotel, from Jefferson, from whatever had been lurking in that place. As I drove out of town, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing in the road behind me, watching me leave. Something dark, with glowing eyes. But when I blinked, it was gone. I never went back to Jefferson, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the world feels still, I think I can hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. And I wonder if I ever really left that hotel. Old Riverside Hotel. I took the job at the old Riverside Hotel because I needed the money and because I figured it would be easy work. I had no idea that what I'd experienced there would change how I felt about the world, or what's beyond it, forever. The Riverside wasn't a typical hotel. It had a reputation. Built in 1910, the place had seen its fair share of history. In its early years, it had been the place to stay for anyone traveling through the small town. Over the decades, it had housed everyone from traveling salesmen to politicians. Even a few celebrities had supposedly stayed there back in the day, though no one could name any of them anymore. By the time I came to work there, it was just an aging relic of the past. Faded wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and old oil paintings in heavy gold frames lining the walls. The kind of place that smelled like dust and age, like the memories of 100 years had soaked into the very foundation. I started as the night clerk. The hours were long, but quiet. The hotel didn't see much business anymore. Most nights, we'd have maybe 3 or 4 rooms booked, if that. It was mostly older folks, retirees stopping off on a long road trip, or people who didn't mind staying in a place that looked like it hadn't been updated in 50 years. My job was simple. Check people in, keep an eye on the front desk, and make sure the lobby stayed clean. Easy enough, right? At first, everything was fine. The first couple of weeks were quiet. Just me sitting behind the desk, reading a book or watching TV on my phone. The occasional guest would come in, and I'd check them in and hand them their key. Yes, the Riverside still used actual keys. It was that old-fashioned. But then things started to happen. It was small at first. I'd be sitting at the desk late at night, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd get this feeling, like someone was watching me. I'd look around the lobby, expecting to see someone standing there, but it was always empty. The air would get heavy, and I'd feel a chill, like a draft had crept in from somewhere, but there were no open windows or doors. Then, one night, it got worse. I was alone at the desk, as usual. There were only 2 guests in the hotel that night, an older couple staying in one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. It was past midnight, and I hadn't seen anyone for hours. I was just about to start closing up the lobby when I saw her. A woman standing at the far end of the hallway, near the old staircase. She was wearing a long, dark dress, the kind you'd see in an old photograph, and her hair was pinned up in a neat bun. At first, I thought maybe she was one of the guests, someone from another room that I hadn't checked in. But something about her felt off. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring straight ahead, not at me, but at the wall in front of her. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. My first instinct was to walk over, ask if she needed help, but as soon as I stood up, she turned and walked up the stairs. There was something strange about the way she moved. It wasn't natural. She didn't make a sound, not even the creak of the old wooden stairs. It was like she wasn't even touching the ground. I hesitated for a second, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't just ignore it. So I followed her. I made my way up the stairs, each step creaking beneath my feet, the air growing colder the higher I went. When I reached the 2nd floor landing, the hallway was dark, and the only sound was the hum of the old radiator at the end of the corridor. I looked around, but the woman was gone. I knew I hadn't imagined her. I'd seen her, clear as day. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to go back downstairs or check the rooms. And that's when I heard it. A voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper, coming from one of the rooms at the far end of the hall. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The voice was low, almost pleading, and as I stepped closer, it got louder. I stopped outside room 214, the door slightly ajar. I knew no one was staying in that room. I hadn't checked anyone into it for days, but the voice was coming from inside. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of the moonlight filtering in through the window. And there, standing in the center of the room, was the woman. She was facing the window, her back to me, and she was muttering something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was desperate, like she was trying to explain something. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest, and called out to her again. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Are you okay?" She didn't turn around, but her voice stopped, For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, slowly, she turned her head, just enough for me to see her face in the faint light. Her eyes, they were wrong, empty, hollow, like she was looking through me, not at me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, before I could even process what I was seeing, she vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, the room was empty. I stood there frozen, unable to move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but there was no explanation. I had seen her, heard her, and now she was gone. I didn't tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? The other staff had warned me about the hotel's history, but I had brushed it off as just old stories. Now I wasn't so sure. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing her more often. Sometimes she'd be in the lobby, standing by the front desk, just out of the corner of my eye. Other times I'd catch a glimpse of her walking down the hall, disappearing into one of the rooms. But it wasn't just her. I started seeing others. Men in old-fashioned suits, sitting in the lobby's antique chairs, staring out the windows. A little boy running down the hall, laughing, but when I'd follow, there'd be no one there. Shadows that would flicker just at the edge of my vision, only to disappear when I turned to look directly at them. The Riverside was full of them. Ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call them. They were always there, lingering, watching, reliving their last moments over and over again. And the more I saw them, the more I realized they weren't just memories of the past. They were stuck there, trapped in the hotel, unable to leave. I quit the job not long after that. I couldn't take it anymore. The constant feeling of being watched, the ghosts that would appear and disappear without warning. It was too much. I packed up my things and left the town behind, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that something followed me. Every now and then, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a figure, standing just out of sight. And I wonder if the ghost of the Riverside ever truly let me go. The ghosts of Hotel Chelsea. I wasn't looking for a haunted experience when I booked a room at the Hotel Chelsea. It was more of an afterthought, really. I had always been fascinated by its long storied history and the infamous list of creatives who had lived and worked there. Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, Patti Smith, some of my idols. I wanted to feel that energy, that raw New York creative spirit. But the night I spent there would leave me with something far darker than inspiration. I had just moved to New York and was staying in a friend's tiny apartment in Brooklyn while looking for my own place. That's when I came across an online listing for the Hotel Chelsea. It wasn't cheap, but I figured spending a night in a place so rich with history would be worth it. The thought of sleeping where Mark Twain and Stanley Kubrick had once laid their heads sent a thrill through me. I packed a small bag and caught the subway into Manhattan. As I approached the towering brick structure, I felt a slight chill. It was mid-fall, the leaves starting to turn and a crisp breeze rolling through the streets. The wrought iron balconies stood out against the facade, giving the hotel a gothic vibe that contrasted starkly with the hustle of 23rd Street. It looked like something out of another time, untouched by the modernization happening all around it. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the weight of its history pressing down on me. The lobby was dimly lit, with old, faded wallpaper and dark wood paneling. The air had a slight mustiness to it, as if the building was absorbing every moment, every life that passed through its walls. It felt alive in a way. The receptionist, a woman with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, barely looked at me as I checked in. "Room 512, she said, handing me a tarnished brass key. I thanked her, grabbed my bag, and headed toward the elevator. As the old machine creaked and rattled its way up, I couldn't help but think about the stories I'd heard, about how some people claimed the Chelsea was haunted. I brushed it off. It was New York. Every building had a story. When I stepped into my room, I was surprised by how ordinary it looked. A queen-sized bed with an antique headboard, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the street below. The walls were a pale yellow, peeling slightly near the ceiling, and the air felt heavy, like the room had been sealed shut for too long. But it was quiet, too quiet for a city like New York. I threw my bag onto the bed and decided to explore. The narrow hallways felt endless, with countless doors leading to other rooms, each holding its own secrets. The hotel was nearly empty, which added to the eeriness. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside felt amplified. As I wandered, I came across an old plaque on one of the walls that read "The Haunted Hall of Chelsea." I stopped in front of it, intrigued. I had heard rumors about the ghosts of the Chelsea, some of the more famous ones like Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen. But there were others, less famous but just as persistent. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search, curious about the place's haunted reputation. That's when I read about Mary. Mary had been a Titanic survivor, a widow who lost her husband in the icy waters of the Atlantic. She had lived at the Chelsea for years, in the exact same room I was staying in, room 512. The story went that she never left the hotel, that she still lingered on the 5th floor, especially near the western end, mourning her lost love. And apparently, she didn't take kindly to visitors. I couldn't help but shiver, even though I didn't believe in that sort of thing. Still, the coincidence of being placed in her room gnawed at me. I decided it was better to head back to the room and settle in for the night. As I walked back, the corridor seemed longer than before, like the walls were closing in. I passed a few doors, some of them cracked open, revealing shadowy interiors. The soft hum of city life outside was barely audible, replaced by an unsettling silence. I reached my door and fumbled with the key, the tarnished metal feeling oddly cold in my hand. When I finally got inside, the air felt different. The temperature had dropped noticeably. My breath came out in faint puffs, and I instinctively glanced at the window, wondering if I had left it open. But it was shut tight. I heard a faint knock, so soft I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time. It was coming from the wall near the bed. The western wall. "Hello!" I called out, half expecting someone to respond, even though I knew better. There was no one next door. The knocking stopped, and the silence returned, thicker and heavier than before. I stood frozen for a moment, waiting, listening. That's when I heard something else. Whispers. Faint, indecipherable, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I knew I wasn't alone. I felt a wave of cold wash over me, and I turned to look at the mirror above the dresser. Fog was beginning to form on its surface, slowly, like breath on glass. My heart began to race, and I backed away, instinctively pulling my phone from my pocket. I snapped a picture of the mirror without thinking, as if I needed proof of what I was seeing. That's when I saw it. A name written in the condensation. Mary. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. I wanted to leave, to get out of the room, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, rooted to the floor. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, but I still couldn't understand them. Then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The temperature plummeted, and the mirror fogged up even more, completely obscuring my reflection. My breath came in shallow gasps as the name on the glass faded, replaced by new words. "Leave me alone." That was enough. I bolted for the door, grabbing my bag as I went. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the oppressive feeling lifted, but I could still feel eyes on me, watching. I didn't stop running until I reached the lobby. The receptionist didn't even look surprised when I told her I was leaving early. She just nodded and processed my checkout with an eerie calm, as if she had heard it all before. I left the Chelsea that night and never looked back. I don't know if what I saw was real or just my imagination running wild. But one thing is for sure. Something is lingering in that hotel, something angry. Something that wants to be left in peace. If you ever stay at the Chelsea, take my advice. Don't go looking for ghosts. You might just find them. Or worse, they might find you. Restless souls at Bramblewood. I wasn't supposed to be working at the old Bramblewood Inn that night, but somehow I ended up covering for a co-worker. It was the off-season, which meant the hotel was mostly empty, save for a few stragglers passing through the small town. The place itself had stood for over a century, weathered and worn, with ivy creeping up the sides and old wooden shutters hanging by a thread. People around town said it was haunted, but I'd never paid much attention to the stories. The Bramblewood had that charm some people loved. Antique furniture, creaky floors, and walls that seemed to hold secrets from the past. I'd been working there for about 6 months, mainly as a bartender in the old lounge. The bar was this grand, polished oak thing, with shelves stacked with dusty bottles of liquor that looked like they'd been around since Prohibition. Most nights it was dead quiet, but something about that particular night felt different. It was a stormy evening, the wind howling outside as rain lashed against the windows. A few guests sat scattered in the lounge, quietly nursing their drinks. The old fireplace crackled, casting flickering shadows across the room. I remember feeling uneasy, like the air had thickened somehow. I chalked it up to the weather and tried to push the feeling aside. Around 10 p.m, most of the guests had retired to their rooms, leaving the lounge empty except for me. I was behind the bar, wiping down glasses and preparing to close up when it happened. The first sign was subtle. One of the bar stools, which had been neatly tucked under the counter, slid back on its own. Just a few inches, but enough to catch my attention. I stopped what I was doing and stared at the stool, waiting for some logical explanation. Maybe the floor was uneven, or the wind had rattled something loose. But then another stool moved. This time, it slid all the way out, as if someone had pulled it out to sit. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. There was no one else in the room. I stood there, frozen, trying to convince myself that I was seeing things. That was when I heard it. A faint, low hum, almost like a distant conversation, coming from the far end of the bar. It was so quiet at first. I thought it was just the wind. But as I listened more closely, I realized it was voices. Indistinct, murmuring, like a crowd of people talking just out of earshot. I took a few steps toward the sound, my pulse quickening. The voices stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything, when suddenly, a glass flew off the shelf behind me and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening in the empty lounge, glass exploding in all directions. I jumped back, my heart racing. There was no one near the shelves. The glass had been sitting there securely just moments before. I slowly backed away from the mess, unsure of what to do. I'd never been one to believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I couldn't explain what was happening. I went to grab the broom from the supply closet to clean up the glass, but as I turned my back, I heard the sound of bottles rattling on the bar. When I spun around, I saw them. A row of liquor bottles at the edge of the counter, teetering back and forth like they were being nudged by invisible hands. One by one, the bottles began to slide across the bar, slow at first, then faster, as if something unseen was pushing them. I stared in disbelief, watching as they lined up at the edge, ready to topple over. I reached out, trying to stop them, but before I could, a bottle of whiskey tipped over, crashing to the floor and shattering like the glass before it. That's when the lights flickered. The entire room plunged into darkness for a split second before the lights buzzed back to life, dimmer than before. The shadows seemed to stretch and warp across the walls, growing longer, more distorted. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, but there were no windows open. It was as if something had swept through the room. I couldn't take it anymore. My instinct screamed at me to get out of there, but just as I turned to leave, the old jukebox in the corner crackled to life. It hadn't worked in years. It was more of a decoration than anything else. But now, it was playing an old jazz tune, the scratchy melody cutting through the tension in the air. The music was warped, distorted, like it was coming from deep underwater, and the room seemed to hum with an unseen energy. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the bar. As I reached for the handle, the bar stools began to move again. This time, they weren't just sliding, they were spinning. Slowly at first, then faster, the seats turning in circles like an invisible carousel. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear the faint music from the jukebox echoing through the empty halls, and the lights flickered again as I made my way to the front desk. The night manager, Carl, was there, looking as calm as ever. I rushed up to him, breathless, trying to explain what had just happened. "The bar," I stammered. "The bottles, they moved on their own, and the jukebox, it turned on by itself. There's something in there." Carl didn't even blink. He just gave me a tired smile, like he'd heard it all before. "Yeah," he said, leaning back in his chair. "That happens sometimes. The Bramblewood has a way of entertaining its guests." Entertaining? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You mean this is normal?" Carl nodded. "We get all sorts of things. Bottles moving, lights flickering, glasses breaking on their own. Sometimes the old elevator goes up and down by itself, or the furniture shifts around. It's just part of the hotel's charm." "Charm?" I repeated, still trying to catch my breath. "You're telling me that this place is haunted, and that's just normal?" Carl shrugged. "It's been like this for as long as anyone can remember. People say the spirits here are restless, but they don't mean any harm. Just like to let you know they're around, I guess." I didn't know what to say. I'd heard the stories about the Bramblewood, about the strange things that happened there, about the guests who'd checked out early, spooked by something they couldn't explain. But I had never really believed any of it. Until now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Has anyone seen them? The spirits, I mean?" Carl nodded again. "A few. Some guests have reported seeing figures late at night. People dressed in old-fashioned clothes, wandering the halls, or sitting in the lounge. They vanish as soon as you get close, but they've never hurt anyone. I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. So what do we do? Carl stood up and grabbed his keys. Well, I'll go check the bar, make sure nothing's broken beyond repair. As for you, he smiled. Get used to it. You've got the night shift after all. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I left the hotel, every creak, every gust of wind felt like something was watching me, following me. I never took the night shift again, but the memories of that evening, the eerie music, the moving objects stayed with me. I still wonder sometimes what it was that haunted the Bramblewood Inn. What kind of spirits lingered in those old walls, moving things, breaking glasses, playing with the living like we were nothing more than guests in their eternal stay. You've heard the horrors. Subscribe if you want to keep the spirits on your side. Until next time, pleasant dreams.